So how do we put all this in context? What kind of patterns do we see in this parsha? So when I look at the parsha, I look at several things. One, what number is the parsha? So this is the 21st parsha, okay? And then I look at how many verses are in the parsha. There are 139 verses in the parsha. And I look at the gematria of the name of the parsha. In this week's parsha, there's two names. It's Ki Tisa. And so if we look at the word Sisa or Tisa, it's Taf, Shin, Aleph, and together that's a gematria of Taf is 400, Shin is 300, Aleph is 1, is 701. So what's interesting about that is that the gematria of Shabbat is 702. So if you take the word Tisa, which is 701, you're allowed to add 1 for the word, which is 702. So we see there's a connection within the gematria of the word Sisa with the parsha, which also introduces Shabbat. It says that you will guard my Shabbats and keep my Sabbaths. So there's some overall sense of the Sabbath in this parsha. As well, if we look at how many verses are in the parsha, there are 139 verses in the parsha, and whenever we think of the number 39, we think of either the number of lashes a person gets, or we think of how many malacha are prohibited on the Sabbath, or how many types of work we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. And there are 39 types of work we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. So again, between the number of verses in the parsha and between the name of the parsha and the gematria of the parsha, we see that there's some connection to the number 39. Now, we just finished with Purim, which had to do with being saved from Haman and Amalek, and this whole idea of the judgments that came against us. And we see now we're reading Parshat Para, which has the same first two letters as Purim. Just as Purim was a redemption, this Parsha is also in a way of cleaning. And in this Sabbath, which is Shabbat Para, we're going to read a special mafter, and the mafter is going to come from Parsha Chukas, which is the 39th parsha in the Torah, which again is interesting because we just said there's 139 psukim in the parsha, which is connecting to the Shabbat, the 39 and the Shabbat. Now we're reading the 39th parsha in the mafter. Now what's interesting as well is within the mafter there are 22 verses in the mafter, and that's going to come from chapter 19 of Numbers, verse 1 to 22. And what's also interesting is the Haftorah for Parsha, for Shabbos Para, is going to come from Ezekiel 60 to 38. Again, 22 verses in the Parsha. So we have this idea there's 22 verses in both the Mafter and in the Haftorah. So why 22? Whenever I think of 22, I think of the 22 letters in the alphabet. So it has something to do with speech. That the letters, which are the building blocks of speech, and we're also going to be introduced to Betzalel, and it said that Betzalel had the ability to take the letters and to put them together to form things. This was a unique gift of his. So if we look at this idea of we're being purified of our speech, and we're coming up to Pesach, and Pesach means the mouth speaks. So you have this concept of learning to speak clearly. This Parsha Ki Tisa is in the middle Parsha of 5 Parshas of the building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is Parsha Truma, Tetzava, Ki Tisa, Vayachal, and Pekudi. Now these 5 Parshas, building of the Mishkan will eventually turn into the temple. And why was the second temple destroyed? It was destroyed because of Lashon Hara and bad speech. So now, as we're coming up to Passover, and we're coming up to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and in Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is the first of Nisan, the temple was dedicated. This is when actually the Mishkan was dedicated, and so the temple was destroyed for bad speech. So now we're learning to correct our speech. So we're getting purified of our negative speech, which also, by the way, on Yom Kippur we open up with Kol Nidre, and it's interesting because the end of this parsha, Moshe is going to come down after 40 days and 40 nights with the second Lukos, which is Yom Kippur. So there's this whole idea of purifying our speech and the Sabbath that we're coming to in this parsha. And it's very important, and how do we tie these two concepts together, is that it's very important, A, to learn to speak properly, B, to speak with integrity, not to use condescending, sarcastic type of speech, but also to keep the Sabbath. And you can put the two together, that especially on Shabbat, it's important to really, what are we talking about at our Shabbat table? Are we talking about gossip? Are we talking about secular sort of things? Or are we trying to raise our level of speech? So the Sabbath and speak are very connected. If we look at one of the things they talk about the Sabbath is that we have something called the delight of the Sabbath, or what's called an Oneg Shabbat. And Oneg is spelled Ayin Nun Gimel. And if we take those letters, Ayin Nun Gimel, and we kind of just switch them around a little bit, we get Nun Gimel Ayin is Nega. Nega is a type of tsaras, which is a spiritual skin disease that a person would be afflicted with if they didn't speak properly. So we see that the opposite of nega is oneg, and so oneg is also to the Shabbat. So really, we really need to learn to speak not just on the Shabbos, but definitely on the Shabbos, but also during the week with a certain level of integrity.